Hello, I am here to talk about Frankenstein, the legendary Gothic epistolar novel, romantic in essence, with imagination and intensity to its core. Probably the first sci-fi. Not probably, it's the first sci-fi. This is not a precursor, this is the first science fiction or fantasy that has been written, period. But not only that, it's a great novel. I read an abridged edition when I was under 10 years old and never read it again. And lately I just felt like going back to it because I realized that I had not read the real thing. And I picked this one for £1 in a second-hand bookstore. And I read it and I was so wrong. There was so much to... I didn't expect to find anything in this that would be sort of like new to me. But that's maybe because of the damage that the films have done to the Frankenstein myth. And yeah, I mean, I loved this reading, and even though I loved it, I'm a bit disappointed that I have read the wrong, heavily edited, posterior edition, the one that Mary Shelley wrote way after, when she was already a more mature and more controlled writer. So part of the madness that is supposed to be in the first edition and in the second edition is not here. For that reason, I will probably reread the story, but read the real thing, the previous one, because I have heard from multiple channels that I trust, such as Too Late to Apologize or Michael K. Vaughan or Steve Donaghy, that the good one is the one that I have not read. So well, that's that. Maybe I'll make a video doing Frankenstein versus Frankenstein in the future, in the near future, because I'm gonna reread this very recently. Like I really feel like rereading it already now. So yeah. That's it. A bit of background on the author. Mary Shelley was a teenager when she met Percy Shelley, and they escaped away from England and then came back. Percy Shelley was married, so they were once they came back, society completely condemned that action, and they were ostracized from society. They fell into poverty. Mary Shelley had she's also the daughter of William Goldwyn and Mary Wollstonecraft, which, yeah, what a family. And also Mary Shelley had a child that was premature and died. And on that sort of like, on that context, on that storm of tragedy and despair, she traveled to Geneva to see, or at least they met in Geneva, Lord Byron and his friends. They went both there, and in a summer that was unnaturally stormy because of a volcano that had erupted recently or something like that. They had to spend indoors multiple days and evenings with Lord Byron and his friends, just trying to entertain themselves. A task that Lord Byron was good at doing. He proposed that they would come up with the most terrifying stories that they could think of, and that proposal is the gestation of this novel. Mary Shelley did not manage, she says in the prologue that she did not manage to come up with any story immediately, but after a few days, in a nightmarish night of thunder, she saw a monster. She saw a scientist, she saw the monster, a scientist that makes sense in the time of Darwin and the whole scientific revolution that was going on and about to completely explode into a completely unrecognizable world. It makes sense that science is involved in this novel, in the creation of this monster. The plot is actually it's an epistolar novel, as I said. So you have Walton, who's a young captain of a ship that is in an expedition in the Arctic, and he's writing letters. So this is an epistolar novel, and it's also kind of like a Russian doll epistolar novel, because he's writing letters to his sister Margaret, and his sister is reading them, right? But in those letters, he tells her about a man that he found in the Arctic when they were cutting through the ice, and this man is Frankenstein, who tells him the story of his tragedy, the tragedy of his creation and his creation's tragedy. So there's a moment where you are listening to Frankenstein's creature tell his story through Frankenstein's telling of that story in Walton's letter that is being written to Margaret. So in that sense, it seems to be a complex structure, or at least that's how how I perceive it. What else? So basically, Frankenstein, in his pursuit for scientific knowledge of a metaphysical aspect, he decides that he wants to create life out of death, and in a process that is kind of obscure in our eyes. But we do know that, like, he takes electricity is involved, and corpses from a cemetery are involved as well. He creates a creature. We don't know much about this creature, and I think that just like in Kafka's Metamorphosis, it's also I think the right choice to not give a clear description of what it is and how it is, because that gives much more power. Each person will think the worst, whatever the worst is for them, right? We only know that it has teeth of a ghostly whiteness, like Moby Dick's skin, and that is of great proportions, and that its ugliness is beyond description. As this creature comes into life, Frankenstein feels immediately repulsed by its image and escapes, leaves his creature to figure out life by itself. And this monster does that. It takes a notebook from the table and leaves. In leaving, he wanders around and escapes to a woodland where he sees a family of peasants, shepherds that end up being refugees. He by listening to them, by spying on them, he learns language. He learns about mankind. He steals books from them. This is a way of Mary Shelley to also tell us about the inspiration that she had on this book. So Paradise Lost is mentioned, Plutarch's Lives are mentioned, etc. And in learning about humanity, we learn about the monster's passions, about his empathy for this family, about his journey for love and for interaction with other beings, about its own ugliness. In the mirror that of this ideal family that he observes from the outside, he sees himself as not only different but monstrous. And in the increasing empathy and love, affection that he feels for them, he decides to show himself. And in doing that, expecting after having learned language and expecting that his use of rhetoric will be enough for them to see beyond his appearance into what he actually is in his inside, he presents himself and is met with aggression and horror. They escape from him. This fills him with this, and other events fill him with hate for mankind, for the society that made him and that then repudiate him, and escapes in search for his creator. In this search, he finds Frankenstein's son and kills him. And then Frankenstein, looking for the creature, finds the monster, and the monster asks him for accountability. He tells him that he was not wretched when he was created, but that humanity despises him and that he cannot live in solitude, and asks him to create a female creature of his same nature, so that they both will be able to escape to the wilderness, away from civilization, and then he will finally live in peace. But Frankenstein denies this, and in denying to the creature what its own nature requires, he triggers a spiral of despair that ends with tragedy all the way to the last page of this book. I think that's the main plot. That's the main part of this book. This is the story. There is many themes here that can be found working all together. Definitely the president of Mary Shelley's life fits as inspiration for this story. The death around her and the escape that she did. It's like Frankenstein escaping from his creature and then coming back and suffering the consequences, and those consequences being death, right? That is a reading that can be done for this. It's definitely also and this, I think this is mentioned at some point in the book, is like it's Promethean, in the sense of like there's a pursuit of divine like power, the power of the creation of life. In that creation, the gods punish first Frankenstein, the creator, and then the creature punishes the this a dual. It's like both creator and creature are suffer the consequences of that attempt of trying to steal the fire from the gods. The creature itself presents himself as an Adam, a first man. And when he says, "You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being." In that conversation in chapter 17, there is multiple appeals to his being like an Adam, and in that sense, like that, the Genesis story also fits quite well with this. One can easily connect the creation of this monster with the eating of the apple of Adam, the acquisition of knowledge. Frankenstein suffered the fall in creating the monster, and the monster suffered the fall in learning about its condition, in reading, like Frederick Douglass as well, or Solomon. There's multiple accounts of how the acquisition of this knowledge, of eating the apple of knowledge, Odin losing his eye, has negative consequences on those who attempt that. We have the monster say, "I discovered the names that were given to some of the most familiar objects of discourse. I learned and applied the words fire, milk, bread, and wood. I cannot describe the delight I felt when I learned the ideas appropriated to each of these sounds and was able to pronounce them. I distinguished several words without being able yet to understand or apply them. Such as good, dearest, and happy." Further on in the next page, he says, this is page 123 of this edition from Cambridge Literature, but I do not recommend this edition, as I said before. "I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool. At first, I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed who I was reflected in the mirror, and when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitter sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. In learning an ability and that was part of the nature of this creature, in fulfilling that nature, the monster found his own curse, his damnation, and the same for Frankenstein, because it's the creator that was not able to be up to the task of its own creation, of creating. We can also see like parallels with, for example, the golem in the Kabbalah, in the Jewish mythology, how creating life from the inert. So these themes, although they inspired modern literature, especially science fiction and films, they are ancient and universal. They are from the oldest religious texts to the present. In terms of films, one can see, for example, in the film Blade Runner or the book that inspired it, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I think that's the title. Yeah, one can see the replicants rebelling against the creators, and the creators being the real monster, which is pretty much the same message that one gets, whether or not she was purposely. I don't think that is or should ever be the case, that the author tells you who you should hate and who you should love, but specifically here, it's definitely, I think, an universal reaction to feel empathy for the monster rather than for the creator of that monster. No one ever sided with Frankenstein in reading this book, and at least no one sane that I know and respect. Yeah, so we have that. I think a very interesting and characteristic part of this novel is also that human stops being creation. This is the first myth in which we become the creator. And as I was saying before, that probably has a lot to do with the time, with Darwin and the scientific revolution, and us starting to have that kind of power over nature, or at least believing that we have it. And it's also an augury of the consequences that overusing that power or misusing it might have. I thought we would learn that 2 world wars after that. Another film that I felt, I've rewatched recently, and that I felt it was heavily inspired, was 2001: Space Odyssey. HAL 9000, the computer, the AI, is the monster in that story, and when the monster learns that its father, its creator, is trying to disconnect it, to destroy it, because it gains self-consciousness, it rebels against its creator. So again and again we have the theme of Oedipus being better than his father, and in this case, in the case of Frankenstein, not being able, or not killing the father, yet fighting against it. The father suffering the consequences of creating the son for not being able to live up to the task of being a father, a creator, a god in this case. And both suffering in a spiral that could only be resolved positively if such a creator was up to that task, was to the end, and not just to the completion of insufflating life into the inert, but actually accepting the accountability after that. In the moment that is not done is when sort of like the fall it becomes inevitable, and with the fall, as Milan Kundera puts it, what one gains is the shit. It's the sense of shame and repugnance, the monster. So yeah, a book indeed. A great book. It might be one of my favorite books, since I'm gonna reread it for the third time in the other edition. I'll find out whether or not this is indeed one of my favorite books. Thank you, and I'll link in the description a much better book review of this by Too Late to Apologize. I think that was a really good one, and maybe I'll also link down the Michael K. Vaughan one. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.